Welcome to ELA Today with Keats K. I'm Keats K, and today we will be discussing plot. So let's get started. The first question we should ask ourselves is, what is plot? There's a few different theories out there. Today we'll be discussing two from Aristotle and Gustav Freytag. So let's jump in. When it comes to plot, the first guy that really looked at it, really analyzed it, was Aristotle in 335 B.C.E. with the publication of his book Poetics. In that book, he wrote, "Plot is the imitation of the action." What does that mean? Let's take a look. Plot is the action that occurs in the story. So when Aristotle says plot is the imitation of the action, imitation means actors are imitating real life action. So it's just plot is action. It's what happens in the story. It's that simple. It's the arrangement of all the action that occurs in the story. Aristotle, in his book Poetics, of course, also introduced the 3-act structure that all stories must have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It doesn't mean that it has to happen first event first, second event second, chronologically. It just means that each story, however it's told, must have a definite beginning, a definite middle, and a definite end. Here's Aristotle's plot, his structure. Act 1, the beginning. Act 2, the middle. And Act 3, the end. Like I said, it doesn't need to be chronological. It could be you start with the end of the story, and the rest of the story is how we got to the end. It could be told however you want, but there needs to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. What drives the plot is the action, and what drives the action are the characters. And it can be internal action, the characters struggling with themselves, or it can be external action, the characters struggling with other characters or struggling with nature. And that's where we come to conflict in literature, which we'll get to later. But there is no story without action. You need action to have a story. You need action to have a plot. Aristotle's 3-act structure was how you wrote drama, how you wrote stories until 1863. And in 1863, after a lengthy analysis of Greek tragedy and Shakespearean drama, a German novelist and playwright, Gustav Freytag, proposed another way to structure plot. In essence, just another way to format the action of the story. It can still be encompassed within Aristotle's 3 acts, but it goes into a little bit more detail. And that's what we're going to spend the rest of this video on, looking at Freytag's pyramid. Maybe you've heard of Freytag's pyramid. It's also commonly known as a plot mountain. And this is a picture of it. It plots 5 major points. The first is the beginning, the exposition. The second is a series of little points called the rising action. The third, the climax, the peak of the story. The fourth is the falling action, and the fifth is the resolution, or the end. These 5 points are commonly known as the 5 elements of plot. And here we have exactly what I just said. The 5 elements of plot. First, we start with the exposition, the beginning. The second is the rising action, which is a series of conflicts that need to be resolved until we get to the major conflict, the climax. And once the resolution begins with the climax, that's when we get to the falling action, which leads us to the ultimate resolution and the end of the story. Let's jump in and look at Freytag's pyramid in detail, starting with the beginning, the exposition. The exposition introduces us to 3 things: the characters, the setting, and the backstory of it all. The exposition sets the scene. Who are these people? Where do they come from? Where have they been? What's their story up till now? And why do we care? It introduces us to everything we need to know, the normal world, their normal world, before the story starts, so that we understand the changes they go through along the way. The exposition ends when the main character answers what is known as the call to action. Something is calling them to leave their normal world. It's the central conflict of the story, the central action of the story. And the call to action is the invitation for the main character to begin their journey, to start the story in order to resolve this central conflict. After the exposition, we start the rising action, which we'll get into now. The rising action is going to take us up Freytag's pyramid, up the mountain, towards the climax. To get to the climax, whatever major conflict may be driving the story, our character is going to have to really prove themselves able to handle that conflict. And so there's going to be little conflicts along the way that they're going to have to resolve first. Conflict. You can't have a story without conflict. And conflict, what is conflict? Conflict is action. There are 6 types of conflict in literature, divided into 2 categories, internal conflict and external conflict. Internal conflict involves the main character being at odds with themselves and struggling internally. External conflict involves the character facing another character, facing society, dealing with the forces of nature, dealing with the presence and conflict that comes with it of technology, or even dealing with the supernatural. Again, conflict is so important, and it's what drives the story. So without conflict, you have no story. With conflict, you have story, and with story, you have plot. So each minor conflict builds to the climax. This is the rising action. Minor conflicts that the main character has to overcome in order to get to the climax. Harry Potter doesn't jump from coming to Hogwarts to meeting Lord Voldemort in battle. He defeats a troll first, he makes friends, he overcomes so many little obstacles to get to Lord Voldemort. And that is the rising action. Once those obstacles, those conflicts, all of that action, the rising action, is overcome and resolved, our character is ready for the climax. The climax is the peak of the story. We are now at the top of Freytag's pyramid, at the top of the plot mountain. And it's at the top that there's a turning point in the story. This is where the main character has to face and try to resolve the major conflict of the story, the major conflict that's been driving the story since the call to action, the reason the character started out on this journey to begin with. And boom, just like that, we're into the falling action. Once the major conflict is resolved, there's still some story to tell. Harry doesn't just defeat Lord Voldemort and boom, the story's over. We get to see him recover from the battle, get back on the train to go home to the Dursleys where he doesn't want to go, say goodbye to Hagrid. That's the falling action. In the falling action, it's really the beginning of the resolution. With the climax over, the rest of the story starts to fall into place. Everything begins to get resolved, loose ends get tied up. The conflicts of the story are resolved. The main character heads back home, a changed person. It's important to note that even though on Freytag's pyramid the falling action looks about the same length as the rising action in the exposition, it's really a short piece of the story. It's much shorter because you're just wrapping the story up to get to the resolution, the true ending. And that's where we're at now, the resolution, the true ending. With the resolution, all the conflicts are resolved. Or maybe if it's a series, there's some conflicts that aren't resolved that will get resolved in the next book. The character may go home to where they started the story, but it's not the same. They've changed, so they have to get used to a new normal. And the story ends. The reader leaves the character in their new normal to get used to it, to figure out who they are now, how they've changed, and reflect on the journey they've been on, that we've been on with them. And that is plot. I hope you've enjoyed this journey, and I hope you've changed in some way and you get to reflect on your new normal. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, this is ELA Today with Keats K. I'm Keats K, and I've enjoyed our time.